Hey, I'm Amara, host of Black Girl Gone, a true crime podcast. For over 4 years and more than 200 episodes, I've been telling the stories of missing and murdered Black women and girls, stories that are too often ignored. These are real lives, real families, and real cases that deserve the spotlight. If you're looking for true crime with heart, purpose, and a mission for justice, this is it. Listen to Black Girl Gone on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Their stories matter, and I won't stop telling them.
Welcome to the Murder Diaries. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige. Make sure if you want to listen ad-free, you head over to patreon.com/murderdiariespod. And you can also catch us on YouTube now.
On the morning of Sunday, December 9th, 1984, team members of the Bay Area Rescue Unit met at Redwood Park in Berkeley, California. It was a somber gathering because the job ahead of them was a grim one. They were looking for possible remains of a girl who'd gone missing while running near this park less than a month before. The person they were looking for was Roberta Teresa Lee. Her friends and family affectionately called her by her nickname Bibi, so that's how we'll refer to her for the remainder of this episode. An entire community had been looking for Bibi, and this latest walking search of the park was an almost last-ditch effort to find whatever clues they could to figure out what had happened to her. The team split up into groups and made their way into the park. The dog handler of a German Shepherd removed its leash, and this dog, which was trained to smell for decaying flesh, quickly led the handler to a thicket of bushes, where he discovered parts of a decomposing half-nude human body lying in the heavy brush. This body belonged to Bibi, and it was apparent that she'd met a violent end. So who left Bibi Lee in this shallow grave some 700 feet from the entrance to Redwood Park, heartlessly discarded like so much garbage? Was it the mysterious bearded stranger that an eyewitness described wrestling with someone who looked like Bibi near a windowless van? Was it one of the many students that Bibi was attending college with? Or was something even more sinister at play? Was someone who'd been so much closer to Bibi responsible for this heinous murder? Who would do such a thing to someone as ambitious and fun-loving as Bibi Lee? This is her story.
Used to think it's in my head, but I'm walking with the dead.
Bibi Lee was born on May 28, 1963, in Pennsylvania, to Teresa Lee and Dr. Francis Fan Lee, an MIT professor of electrical engineering and computer science, as well as the founder of Lexicon, a high-tech company based in Massachusetts. And the apple didn't fall far from the tree as it came to intellect and initiative. By the time of her murder, Bibi could speak 5 languages, was halfway through a Greek language course, and taught English as a second language to students at the university. Bibi was also an avid runner who'd competed on her high school track team, and she continued to run between 6 and 10 miles every day. In fact, by the fall of 1984, Bibi Lee had everything going for her. She was a junior at the University of California, Berkeley, studying linguistics. She was also an avid runner and in a committed relationship for 9 months with her college boyfriend, Bradley Page. She met him the year before when the two of them were living at Lothlorien, a Berkeley cooperative residence for students. The two of them began dating in early 1984. And even her mother once commented, quote, "They were getting along so well. They had so many plans. He respected her a lot and he liked her and did nice things for her." Everything indicated that the best part of Bibi's life was just beginning. She'd recently moved out of the co-op and into an apartment that she shared with other student friends. But as it goes with everyone's personal story, not everything was as rosy as it seemed on the surface, especially between Bibi and Bradley. Friends had noticed the relationship between the two of them had become tense. On the night before Bibi disappeared, Bradley went to a party with a young woman named Jan Carminati, someone he'd known from high school. Bibi knew that Bradley had always carried a torch for Jan, And when she learned that he'd taken Jan to a party, this made Bibi extremely jealous. And who can blame her? The next day, Bibi and Bradley had planned to go on a run together at Redwood Regional Park in the Oakland Hills, with Bradley's roommate Jeff DeLotte and another female student named Robin Shaw. But when Jeff backed out at the last minute, it was just Bradley and Robin waiting on Bibi to arrive to the co-op living room that morning. Since Bibi was running late, Bradley and Robin went out to the courtyard to wait for her there. Teresa Nicole, another Lothlorien resident, remembers seeing an angry Bibi in the co-op kitchen shortly after 8:30. Bibi asked Teresa if she'd seen Bradley, who told Bibi that she thought Bradley might still be upstairs. Bibi went to look for him, but returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, seeming angrier than before. Eventually, Bibi found Bradley and Robin in the courtyard, and she snapped at Bradley. "You could have waited." Bradley and Robin were puzzled by this comment because waiting on her is exactly what they'd been doing when she arrived. The trio piled into Bradley's car, a 1969 Dodge station wagon, and drove to the Skyline Boulevard gate of Redwood Regional Park. During the drive up, things remained tense between Bibi and Bradley. Bibi was obviously still upset with Bradley, and given Bradley's date, or whatever you want to call it, with his old high school flame the night before, it was safe to assume that that was Bibi's main issue, and not just being unable to find him before the morning run. Inside the park, Bibi, Bradley, and Robin decided to run south along the West Ridge Trail, a path that ran parallel to Skyline Boulevard. The trail began as a fire road and then narrowed at an archery range, and then emptied 2 miles south of Roberts Park, a small enclave consisting of a pool, playground, and picnic area. Things between Bibi and Bradley seemed icier than ever as they ran, and Robin, who'd fallen behind the pair, watched as Bradley ran off in one direction and Bibi peeled off to another. Robin assumed Bibi wanted privacy, so she caught up with Bradley, and Bradley and Robin ran another 200 yards up to a vista point overlooking the Bay Area. Bradley and Robin admired the view, catching their breath for a few minutes, and then ran to another vista overlooking Mount Diablo. They then returned to the pool area of Roberts Park to look for Bibi. When she was nowhere to be seen, Bradley began to call her name, but Bibi didn't answer. Bradley and Robin then walked the 2 miles back to the Skyline Boulevard gate to see if Bibi had returned to the station wagon. When they didn't find her at the car, Bradley and Robin decided that Robin would remain at the Skyline Park entrance, while Bradley drove the car back along Skyline Boulevard to see if Bibi had exited the park. But when he returned, Bradley told Robin that he hadn't seen Bibi out on Skyline. The two of them discussed what they should do next, including Bradley talking about the ways Bibi might make her way home on her own if they left without her.
Robin wasn't entirely comfortable with this decision, but she acquiesced to the plan when Bradley told her that he knew Bibi better than she did and that he would take responsibility for whatever happened to her.
Back at the Lothlorien Student Co-op, Bradley and Robin went their separate ways, and Bradley ate breakfast in the co-op kitchen. Curiously, he didn't tell anyone about Bibi disappearing while out on a run that morning. At around 1 p.m. that afternoon, he called Bibi's apartment and got her roommate Dana Friedman on the line. He asked Dana if Bibi had returned home. And when Dana said that she hadn't seen Bibi, Bradley told her that he was going to San Francisco and to ask Bibi to leave a message on the apartment message board when she returned home. Yeah, you heard that right. That's another curiosity. This trip to San Francisco is one that Bradley and Bibi had planned to do together. They were going to go to the Exploratorium. Bradley returned back to Lothlorien around 6 p.m. where he had dinner, and by all accounts seemed to be in good spirits, feeling great even. Robin Shaw remembers seeing him that evening and said that Bradley was in such good humor that she assumed everything was fine and that Bibi had returned home. After dinner, Bradley called Bibi's apartment for a second time and spoke with Dana again. He asked for Bibi, and when Dana told him that she wasn't there, Bradley asked her to check to see if she'd picked up his message from earlier. Now, this account would conflict with things that Bradley would later tell the police. That he didn't remember what he did that evening after dinner. That he might have written a paper. At about 11 p.m. that night, the phone rang in Bradley's room. Bradley's roommate, Jeff, answered, and it was another of Bibi's roommates, Meg Luther, on the other end of the line. Jeff shook Bradley awake and handed him the phone. Meg told Bradley that she was concerned because Bibi hadn't come home that night, and she asked if Bradley had seen her at all that afternoon or even the evening. He told her that he hadn't, and when Bradley ended the call, he told Jeff about losing Bibi that morning while running in the park. Bradley and Jeff were conflicted about what exactly they should do next. Ultimately, they decided to make a plan for the next morning, and the two of them went back to sleep. 3 hours later, at around 2 a.m., the phone rang again. It was Meg, and this time she was hysterical. Bibi still hadn't come home, and now Meg felt that something terrible had happened. Bradley got dressed and went over to Bibi's apartment. Meg called around to various police departments and hospital emergency rooms to see if anyone had seen Bibi. But nobody had. Bradley spent the night in Bibi's room. And the next morning, November 5th, Meg called the Berkeley Police Department to file a missing persons report. An officer was dispatched to the apartment who interviewed Bradley. Bradley told him about the run the previous morning and how Bibi had disappeared after she'd gone off on her own. He told the officer that Bibi may have been moody or confused about problems with school, but denied that she had been upset or even angry with him the morning of the run. That evening, the Contra Costa Search and Rescue Unit conducted a full search of the Roberts Park area. Approximately 37 people, 14 Explorer Scouts, several four-wheel drive vehicles, 2 horses, and 5 bloodhound teams participated in the search. Bradley was also present. And one of the searchers, Ilur Nushi, talked with him about the circumstances of Bibi's disappearance. Bradley told Nushi about their run the morning before and the search that he and Robin made when they couldn't find her. Bradley said that Bibi was conflicted about issues with school and her desire to drop out. He also told Nushi that he and Bibi had argued the night before the run, specifically about the date he'd had with his former high school friend.
The search team worked until midnight or 1 a.m., but didn't find a trace of Bibi. Her father speculated to others that Bibi might have tried to hitchhike home after the run, and that's when she may have encountered trouble. At the time of this search, police were already suspecting foul play, but stopped short of calling Bibi's disappearance a kidnapping.
Because this initial search didn't bear fruit, a group of Bibi's friends, including Bradley, banded together to conduct a search of their own. They formed an organization called the Friends of Bibi Lee and tried to raise awareness of Bibi's missing persons case by distributing posters with her photo and description through the East Bay area. A week later, a woman called Patricia Chavez, who was a volunteer with the Missing Children's Project, arrived to Berkeley and became the primary leader of the Friends of Bibi Lee search efforts. Under Patricia's guidance, Friends of Bibi Lee set up headquarters in a donated apartment and began systematically getting the word out that Bibi was missing. A phone bank was even set up by which to receive leads. This tip hotline received more than 700 calls. Among them was a witness who said she saw a burly, bearded man struggling with a woman fitting Bibi's description near Redwood Regional Park at around 11:30 a.m. on November 4th. The witness described the man as white, overweight, and 40 to 45 years of age. He was wearing a tan sleeveless shirt, tan pants, had bloated facial features, and had a mustache and beard. The witness claimed that a late model metallic golden brown American-made van with double doors and smoked mirrors was parked nearby as the man grabbed at the woman's arm. David Carter, a spokesman for Friends of Bibi Lee, said the group had planned to post composite drawings of the suspect. We're pretty certain she was picked up on Skyline Boulevard, where she came out of Roberts' recreation area because the dogs tracked that far. And then the trail just stopped dead, said Patrick Phelps, a Berkeley police inspector. During the next 5 weeks, the search for Bibi Lee led to a media blitz throughout Northern California. The case drew national attention with up to 2,000 volunteers joining the search for Bibi. More than 3 million flyers were distributed across the West. Police even filmed a dramatization of Bibi's disappearance in hopes of capturing the attention of potential witnesses. It ran for 3 minutes and included a dramatic portrayal of the eyewitness account of Bibi struggling with a burly man in his 40s. During this time, search volunteers noticed how checked out Bradley had become with search efforts for Bibi. One person described his involvement as sporadic, and others related instances where it seemed Bradley was less than fully committed. But all search efforts would end on December 9, 1984, when that German Shepherd search dog led a team of volunteers to Bibi's body in a thicket of bushes off Skyline Boulevard, near the entrance to Redwood Park. This particular search had been requested by Patricia Chavez, who was still heading up Friends of Bibi Lee. Bibi's body was found resting on her back and covered with a few inches of dirt and compost material. Over the past month, small animals had been gnawing at her remains. She was still clothed in the outfit she went running in a little more than a month before. Black and white striped jogging shorts, a blue-green long-sleeve shirt, a black t-shirt, and jogging shoes. Bibi's shirts had been pushed up to the bottom of her breastbone, and the back of her skull had been severely bludgeoned and fractured. There were several lacerations in the skin at the back of her head, ranging from 1 to 3 inches. There were also 2 smaller crush-type breaks on the rear skull and a ring fracture encircling the base of the skull. These injuries could have resulted from either someone hitting Bibi's head with a rock or a club, or forcing her head violently down on a hard stationary object, such as a rock or a tree trunk. The coroner's office would later conclude that these injuries couldn't have been caused by a fall or something similarly accidental. Bibi had died from 1 to 3 purposeful blunt force traumas to the head. In other words, she'd been murdered. After Bibi was found, later that morning the Berkeley police called Patricia Chavez to tell her about their discovery. However, they didn't tell Chavez where the body was found, or any other crucial information about the condition of her body. Chavez passed this information on to other volunteers at the Friends of Bibi Lee headquarters. As for Bradley, well, he wasn't present at this time. But when he arrived later that afternoon, Chavez gave him the news.
The Berkeley police called again at around 9 p.m. with a little more information about how Bibi was found. They told Chavez that she'd been identified by a thumbprint. Chavez told Friends of Bibi volunteers that it was official. The body was confirmed to be Bibi Lee.
The next day, December 10th, Bradley Page and Robin Shaw were asked to come to the Oakland Police Department for some questioning. The two were separated, and the case investigators, Sergeant Jerry Harris and Sergeant Lacer, questioned Bradley in a windowless interview room beginning at 10:12 a.m. in the morning. He was advised of his rights, which he waived. And then the officers asked him general questions about his relationship with Bibi, their time at school together, their relationship, and the events that had occurred on the morning she disappeared. At the end of this initial interview, Sergeant Harris left the interrogation room to retrieve a tape recorder. While he was away, he also spoke to another officer about possibly arranging for a polygraph examination for Bradley. Harris returned to the interrogation room and began recording the first of 4 statements, where Bradley went into detail about his run with Bibi and Robin, and what exactly happened when he returned to campus without Bibi. Bradley said that Bibi separating herself during the run wasn't something uncommon for her to do. Recently, she'd gotten up abruptly during dinner and walked outside and then avoided Bradley when he tried to follow her out. When officers asked him if he was angry at Bibi for disappearing in the park, he stated he was upset at the situation and didn't want to give in to her. He added, "I told her that I couldn't deal with it the first time she did it to me, so I just figured that I had to put an end to this kind of behavior sooner or later." When asked if he'd injured Bibi in any way, he denied doing so. This first interview ended at 1:10 p.m., and Sergeant Harris, who had some concerns about some of the things Bradley had said, asked Bradley if he would submit to a polygraph examination. Bradley agreed, and Harris led him back to the polygraph office, introducing Bradley to the officer in charge of the examination, Sergeant Furry. The entire polygraph examination had 3 phases: a pre-test phase, the actual polygraph questioning, and a post-test interview. In the pre-test phase, Furry explained to Bradley how the test worked and told him that he would need to be completely truthful in order to pass the test. During this phase, Bradley indicated that he didn't know where Bibi's body was found, nor did he know what injuries had occurred to her. Then Furry got more specific with his questioning, what's called searching peak of tension. He asked Bradley if he knew what part of Bibi's body was injured, listing each part: her legs, head, stomach, etc. Eventually, Furry turned to the modified general question technique, where he mixed irrelevant questions in with the questions that were more important to the case. Furry repeated this series of questions twice. As Furry asked this set of questions for a third time, Bradley began making crying or wailing noises, especially with question number 4. Did you yourself physically injure Bibi on November 4th? Bradley became so distraught that it was impossible for Furry to continue the test. However, as Furry was removing the polygraph machine components from Bradley's body, he could tell that Bradley hadn't cried any tears during this outburst. Sergeant Furry completed 2 charts from the test prior to Bradley breaking down. Based on these charts, Furry concluded that Bradley had been deceptive in all responses to question 4. Did you yourself physically injure Bibi on November 4th? As to Bradley's answers to question 6, regarding whether or not he had seen Bibi after leaving the park, Furry deemed the data inconclusive. Overall, Furry concluded that Bradley had tested deceptive for the entire test, and specifically told him that he believed he had attempted deception. He also gave these results to Sergeants Harris and Lacer, while Bradley was left alone in the interrogation room. When Harris returned to the room, he found Bradley sitting with his head in his hands, making low moaning noises and saying, "I really loved her, but I really loved her." Bradley was allowed to compose himself before questioning resumed. Harris and Lacer repeatedly told him they believed he had something to do with Bibi's murder. Harris told him that, on top of failing the polygraph test, their suspicions were based on the fact that he'd convinced Rob and Shaw to leave the park without Bibi, that he didn't tell anyone about what had happened to her when he returned to the Lothlorien co-op, and that he only superficially searched for Bibi when the search efforts for her began in earnest. Bradley's reply to all of this was, quote, "Well, if I did do something, I must have blacked it out. I might have blacked it out." But Harris and Lacer didn't buy this selective amnesia claim. Lacer told Bradley to close his eyes and try to remember what happened.
Bradley did so and finally said, "I remember hitting and kicking her and wailing on her or going off on her." But he said he didn't remember where or when this occurred. This admission occurred at 4:10 p.m., nearly 6 hours into Bradley's interrogation.
Harris and Lacer repeatedly tried to get Bradley to give more details about the attack, but Bradley protested that he didn't remember any other details. They finally told Bradley that Bibi's body had been discovered near the area where she and Bradley and Robin had been jogging together. At around 4:30 p.m., Harris tried another tactic of purposefully lying to Bradley. He told him that he knew he was involved because they had found his fingerprints at the scene of the crime. This was, of course, untrue. Harris also suggested that the crime might not be as serious as Bradley thought, that it might be something less than cold-blooded murder, maybe something more along the lines of an accidental killing. None of this worked, and Bradley continued to maintain that he must have blacked out. Shortly before 5 p.m., Harris decided to up the investigation ante by telling Bradley a second lie. He told them that he had a witness who saw Bradley's car south of the entrance to Roberts Park. Bradley said that his car had not been down that way, at least as far as he could recall, and continued to tell the officers that he must have blacked out. Harris stopped the interrogation for a meal break around 5 p.m., and Lacer left to go get some food, leaving Harris alone in the interrogation room with Bradley. The two of them relaxed in their chairs and began to make casual conversation. Bradley talked about his relationship with Bibi and how he thought she was much brighter than he was. He also mentioned that he'd been frustrated with their sexual relationship. She had insisted on coitus interruptus as their only form of birth control. He also mentioned that it had been a very difficult time for him after Bibi had disappeared. Harris responded that he'd been involved in a fatal shooting as a police officer, and that it was possible for one to recover from major traumas like that. When Lacer returned, the interrogation continued. The sergeants repeated their concerns about Bradley's story, that they knew he was lying, and that he'd been south of Roberts Park where she was found, and that he'd been the responsible party for Bibi's death. Faced with these accusations again and again, Bradley went silent for a few moments. He then told the sergeants when he left Shaw in the parking lot to go look for Bibi, he remembered driving out of the park and turning left to go south on Skyline Boulevard. He said eventually he saw Bibi jogging on the opposite side of the road, coming toward him. So he pulled the car into a turnout in front of Bibi. He said he exited the car, took Bibi by the arm, and led her off the road and up into a, quote, little hill area. As he led her off into the trees, he tried to hug her and kiss her and talk to her. But when Bibi pulled away, he said he became very angry. So he backhanded her, knocking her to the ground. He said she fell kind of around a tree. He said she was unconscious and her nose was bleeding. He decided to leave her there, go pick up Robin, and go home. He claimed that he drove back up to the area south of the park later that night between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. and found Bibi still lying next to the tree. And that's when he knew she was dead. He said he got a blanket from the car, laid down and had sex with her dead body. When he was finished, he moved her body closer to Skyline Boulevard, where he used a hubcap from his car to cover her with a layer of dirt, smoothing it over so as to give her, quote, a decent burial. Sergeants Harris and Lacer asked Bradley to repeat his story so that they could take notes. So he did. At 7:07 p.m., the officers began a second taped statement from Bradley. During this interview, he essentially related the same story. But this time, many of his responses to their questions seemed somewhat confused, tentative, even vague. For example, he couldn't remember if he talked to Bibi when he first stopped his car. He didn't remember being back in his room that evening. He couldn't even remember how he got back to the scene of the crime. And when asked if he had sexual intercourse with Bibi after she was dead, Bradley said, "Yeah, I think so." When asked if he had told anyone else this story, Bradley said that he had not and added that until the very day her body had been discovered, he thought or hoped that Bibi was still alive. Despite these indications of imperfect memory, Bradley was very specific about the details of his assault on Bibi. He remembered kissing her on top of her head before he backhanded her with his left hand. He also remembered her falling on her backside next to a tree after he'd struck her, and that she had a bloody nose. He remembered parking in the same place when he returned to the crime scene, and he recalled propping Bibi's head on a rock when he laid down to have sex with her. Bradley completed his taped statement at 7:33 p.m. that evening, and the sergeants told him that he would be arrested and held in custody for the murder of Bibi Lee. He then agreed to speak to Deputy District Attorney Aaron Payne, who arrived shortly after 9 p.m. with Inspector Long. this duo took a third taped statement.
After being advised of his Miranda rights, Bradley immediately recanted his confession. He told Payne and Long that his confession had been a product of confusion, fear, and imagination. Bradley's attorney would later describe his client as sensitive and naive, and that he may have confessed out of sheer fatigue from the lengthy interview. Quote, his words may have been a result of giving up and wanting to get it over with.
The interview with Payne and Long ended at 9:48 p.m., and the attorney and officer told Sergeant Harris about Bradley recanting his confession. Bradley was left in the interview room until 11:25 p.m., at which point he knocked on the door and asked to speak with Harris and Lacer again. The officers began a fourth and final taped statement, in which Bradley rambled on and on about a number of factors which had caused him to give his false confession. The polygraph had scared him. He felt guilty for not having helped Bibi. The officers had told him that he would rot away in jail if he couldn't remember what had happened to her that day in the park. These were the reasons Bradley gave for succumbing to the police. The officers had helped him imagine a scenario in which he had killed her. When asked to explain how he'd come up with the details of the assault story, Bradley said the two things he'd known about the discovery of Bibi's body had helped. He said he knew she'd been found 1/4 mile south of Roberts Park, and that she had been wearing her jogging shorts and shoes at the very least when found. He also, quote, assumed that she was found on the east side of the road. After this final interview, Bradley Page was charged with the murder of Bibi Lee. Bradley's first murder trial occurred in 1986, and he pled not guilty for Bibi's murder. The defense called on Karen Marquardt, the woman who claimed to have seen Bibi struggling with a man near the Warren Freeway the day of her disappearance. Karen said she'd been returning from church that morning, around noon, and as she turned right onto Monterey Street, she saw a Caucasian man and an Asian woman struggling by the side of the road. The woman was wearing jogging shorts and a long-sleeved t-shirt. She said the man, who had both hands on her arm, was pulling the woman up a slope toward a van parked on the side of the road. She described the man as white, in his mid-40s, about 220 to 250 pounds, with a prominent beer belly, a beard, and unkempt hair. A few days after this sighting, Karen said she saw a newscast on TV which featured a photo of Bibi Lee and requested information regarding her disappearance. Because Karen thought Bibi was the woman she'd seen on the side of the road, she called the police. At the trial, Karen also identified a photograph of Bibi Lee as the woman she'd seen that morning. Bradley agreed to take the stand in this trial and was asked about his personal history and the development of his relationship with Bibi. He was then asked questions about November 4th, 1984, the day Bibi disappeared. His description of the trip to Redwood Park and the jog that morning aligned with the testimony that Robin Shaw had given. He explained that he hadn't been worried about Bibi when she jogged away from him and Robin, because it was his assumption that this was just another instance of her walking off and not wanting to be followed. Bradley then described his considerable involvement in the search for Bibi over the previous 5 weeks. He gave testimony about the discovery of Bibi's body and the statements he gave the police afterward. Bradley testified at length about the events at the Oakland Police Department on December 10th, 1984, specifically about how his confession was being egged on with the sergeant's help. This trial would eventually end after 10 weeks with Bradley being acquitted of first and second-degree murder, but with the jury deadlocked in favor of a manslaughter conviction. Because of this, the judge ordered that Bradley be retried. So, 2 years later, in 1988, a second trial was held. And in this one, Bradley was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison. He sobbed and clutched his attorney as the verdict was read. Both trials centered on the controversial confession that Bradley had given the police at the end of 1984. In both proceedings, Bradley took the stand to renounce his taped confession as the wild ramblings of a young man who had been exhausted by hours of grueling questioning. During the second trial, District Attorney Kenneth Burr advised jurors to, quote, "Listen to the tapes and you'll hear the voice of the killer of Bibi Lee." Defense attorney Jean Peretti argued that there was no physical evidence indicating that Bradley was the killer. Bradley's father, Jack Page, was known for his outspoken defense of his son. A journalism professor at Merritt College in Oakland, Page published a long article in 1990 in the weekly East Bay newspaper The Express, in which he stated he believed his son was wrongfully convicted of the murder of Bibi Lee and that another man, still on the loose, may have been the real killer. Under California state law, as long as they have no disciplinary action against them, prisoners earn a day of jail credit for every day that they work while in prison. Because of this, Bradley became eligible for parole after serving less than half of his 6-year sentence. He was released from the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo after serving 2 years and 8 months. Bradley's father would neither comment on his son's plans nor say where he would live. "My son has been punished for 10 years for a crime he didn't commit, and I hope the media will let him assume a useful life," Page said.
Kenneth Burr, the senior deputy district attorney in Alameda County who tried the case, said, "I'm satisfied Mr. Page was held accountable. That's the best I can hope for. Obviously, Bibi Lee will never be returned to her family. That can never be done."
In the years since Bibi Lee's murder and Bradley's conviction, there's always been a question as to whether or not the right person went to jail for the crime. In January of 1994, on her CBS show, Eye to Eye with Connie Chung, Chung stated that she thought Bradley was innocent and was held responsible for the murder because of his false confession. In this segment, while interviewing Bradley's father, Jack, Chung proposed that Bibi's actual killer was Michael Ide, a serial killer who was then serving time for murder in the state of Washington and who had been investigated for 4 killings in the East Bay area. Authorities have stated that they don't believe this serial killer is responsible for Bibi's death. However, Bradley's father believes they should take another look at him. He might be the one who savagely murdered Bibi Lee. And to this day, Bradley Page continues to stand by his own innocence.
Make sure to come back next Thursday for another episode of True Crime Case coverage. Before that, though, you can find us on Monday with our unscripted pop culture segment, and Tuesday, you will be able to catch our brand new segment, Docufiles, where we tell you what documentary to watch, we watch it too, and then we discuss. Make sure also in the meantime to follow us on all of our socials, including our new YouTube at the Murder Diaries Pod or the Murder Diaries Podcast. Until then,
stay safe.
Bye.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose?
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
This episode is brought to you by Greenlight. You can't solve every case for your kids, but with Greenlight, they'll have the instincts and money skills to stay out of trouble. With a Greenlight debit card and money app, parents can monitor spending and teach financial responsibility. Educate your kids as they grow, from earning allowance and tracking chores to learning how to save and invest. Start your risk-free Greenlight trial today at greenlight.com/Spotify.